My name is Andy Tecson, and since 1982, I've been leading a group called ChurchJazz that provides jazz to the church. So ChurchJazz is something that was created when I first set a series of psalms to jazz. These were commissioned by the family of Martin Marty, and I grew up in Riverside where Martin Marty and his wife Elsa were gracious hosts, and I grew up with their kids. Tragically, Elsa Marty passed away from brain cancer, and the Psalms were an incredible support for their faith journey as she made a gracious departure from this life into the next. After that, I met with Marty, and I had the blessing of talking with one of these great theologians and historians about what Psalms would be great to set to jazz. That led to an album and a concert at Valparaiso University called the Jazz Psalms. So that was really my first venture into the church. And after that, with the help of Martin Marty and Dean Luking, who were great friends and incredible forces in the Lutheran world, I had the blessing of being able to bring this music to a number of churches throughout the country. After the Jazz Psalms, I then composed a jazz mass. And I studied the concept of liturgy, which is the work of the people, by having lunch at the Walnut Room in Marshall Fields with David Abrahamson, Jim Wind, and Lee Rosenthal, three contemporaries, all who had various experience within the Lutheran Church. And these amazing pastors talked to me about what it's like to create congregational liturgy. So I composed a jazz mass that was premiered in 1986 on Ascension Day at St. Luke Church, 1500 West Belmont, where David Abrahamson was the pastor. Having done a jazz mass, David Abrahamson and I co-produced a jazz nativity called Bending Towards the Light. That is a composition by Ann Phillips and others who live in New York. It's a great production that they've been doing for 35 plus years. And so we've done it in Chicago for about 20 years now. David then said, well, we've got a Psalms, we've got a Mass, we've got a Nativity, we need a Passion. And that was a work that we collaborated on for many years because it wasn't something that came easily to either of us. The Jazz Passion is the story of Christ's ministry at the end of his life, and it spans the period of time starting with the 40 days in the wilderness, the temptation of Christ, going through all the events that we celebrate in Holy Week, so the washing of the feet, the Last Supper, the arrest, the denial by Peter, the great debate with Pilate, the crucifixion, and the resurrection. The Jazz Passion was in the tradition of Bach, such as his St. Matthew Passion or St. John Passion. Those are works with large choral forces and orchestra. We took this same concept and applied it to jazz, so we have a 12-piece jazz band, 4-part choir, a quartet of singers, some soloists, and we wanted to capture the full majesty and power of this story using all of the forces of jazz and composition. So that was the initial concept. That was premiered in 2010 at St. Luke Church on Belmont. We were really fortunate. We were able to then also celebrate it in New York City at St. Peter's Church, as well as in Nitra, Slovakia, and Berlin, and in Leipzig. One of the fun things about going and doing that work in Europe was that the choirs that we sang with were community choirs in the case of Germany and a university choir in the case of Slovakia. So it showed us as composers that this could be done not just by professional singers, but also by a community choir or a university choir that decided to spend the time to learn the music. Leipzig was an amazing experience just because of the historical significance of being in Bach's hometown. While the Passion was not done at the Thomaskirche for scheduling reasons, I had the amazing experience of playing my saxophone in the Thomaskirche about 15 feet from the grave of Bach as part of a festival of improvisation, mostly on organ, but they brought a few saxophones in too. That was the thrill of a lifetime. David Abrahamson is a Lutheran pastor who created the libretto for the Jazz Passion. And he's got a wonderful gift of both understanding theology, but also the language of contemporary America. And he really brought that together beautifully in the libretto for the Jazz Passion. This was such a big work that I knew I did not have the time and the scope and the energy to write all of the music for it. So I brought in two amazing professional jazz musicians, Bobby Lewis, who is one of the leading trumpet players for decades in Chicago. He's performed with Tony Bennett and Peggy Lee and countless jazz greats. I also reached out to Bobby Schiff, who has worked with many of the same great artists. And these two are just amazing artists and composers and performers. So I was extraordinarily blessed to have two professional jazz musicians, each of whom composed 4 of the 12 pieces, and I composed the other 4, bringing together this collection of resources. So David, Bobby, and Bobby was the best thing I ever did regarding the creation of the Jazz Passion, because having those voices blended together brought a great diversity and just quadrupled the creativity of the effort. The Jazz Passion, with all the instruments and voices, will be performed on Sunday, March 19th at 4 p.m. at St. Cletus Parish Center. And that is the concept that we started with way back in 2010. We decided that it's a fabulous work, and it takes also a lot of singers, a lot of instrumentalists, and a lot of rehearsal time. So one of the things that we've decided is that it's important to have the individual pieces that have these great melodies and harmonies and fabulous lyrics be accessible to a choir director or a pastor that wants to bring them into the parish without doing an hour-long production with 24 musicians. So I worked with Bobby Schiff, the pianist and composer of many of the pieces, so that he could write a piano score that a church music director can play. It has all the notes written out, as opposed to the original jazz scores where a jazz pianist has to interpret jazz chords. So a jazz pianist doesn't need to be hired for this. A church choir director can sit down and just take one piece. For example, let's say that for the celebration during Holy Week of the washing of the feet on Maundy Thursday, a choir director wanted to have his choir sing just the washing of the feet song. That's called Rub-a-Dub-Dub. Well, there will be the score for the pianist and just one other instrument. That's optional, but if you have somebody in the community who can play the trumpet or the saxophone, they can be brought in to play and just give one additional instrumental color, but it's not required. The choral part is written for the traditional soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. So a choir can sing this beautiful song about the washing of the feet and just do that one piece. We have created a studio recording that is online at ChurchJazz.com of each of the 12 pieces. Each of these 12 pieces has our pianist playing the score that is available for the music directors, and it has the singer singing the soprano, alto, tenor, bass arrangement of the piece. This is going to be a resource for church musicians so they can both hear what these pieces sound like, and then if their choirs want to listen to it while they're rehearsing, between choir rehearsals, they can use this as well. This also gives church choir directors the ability to pick a certain piece for a certain day, and they may choose the Resurrection for Easter Sunday. They might choose Recall, Retain, Repeat for Maundy Thursday to celebrate the Last Supper. And of course, some of the music has universal messages that are not tied just to a specific day of Holy Week. The finale, called For You, For Me, and For All, talks about God's grace being for everyone all the time. And that would be a perfect offertory or anthem on any Sunday during the year. Similarly, the opening piece of the work is called The Passion Story, but it talks about God's love being for everyone and being accessible to everyone at all times. One of the pieces is called Push Me, Spirit, Push. That talks about Jesus' temptation in the wilderness for 40 days. And of course, that scripture isn't tied directly to Holy Week either. So we think that the studio recording that is available online at ChurchJazz.com will be a great resource for both pastors and church musicians and choir members as they both look for and then rehearse and perform various segments of this work. We recorded the 12 separate songs of the Jazz Passion at Tone Zone Recording Studio. Roger Heiss is the engineer and the producer at this studio, and it's actually a studio that's owned by a church. And that church is part of Jesus People USA, and it has many great artists both performing and recording there. Roger is an extraordinary set of ears, and he brings those to the production and recording process in a fashion that captures nuances and colors and makes the balance perfect. We are so fortunate to be able to work with musicians of world-class caliber. Daniel Riley sings the role of Jesus in this recording that we made, and he is featured as a cantor at Holy Name Cathedral. He's on Sunday mornings broadcasts for Mercy Children's Home. He's currently on tour with a production of the Kennedy Center of a production called Rockin' Rooster's Barnyard Boogie. So he performs and brings his talents to a wide array of audiences, and we're just so fortunate that he sang the role of Jesus. Dan McDonald sings the role of Pilate in the great debate between Pilate and Jesus in the setting that we call Back and Forth. And both he and Daniel were longtime members of Lakeside Singers, which for 23 years was one of the most amazing professional vocal groups in Chicago. Keisha Waldschmidt is our soprano, and she has been with us for many, many years as a soloist in all these productions that I've talked about. Gail Bassesi sings the alto part. Gail is the director of jazz choral music at Elmhurst College and is an amazing professional jazz singer herself. John Negus also sings some of the bass parts with us, and John is a producer, an instrumentalist, a singer, just an extraordinary talent. So one of the great things about this recording was just the privilege of working with those singers, and of course Bobby Schiff as composer and pianist, and Roger Heiss as the production engineer and just all-around amazing musician who helped pull us all together. I should also thank Tim Frakes, who did the video for the recording, because he was able to take many complicated takes and put them together into a comprehensive and exciting visual presentation. Well, my hope for each of the pieces that we compose and that we're offering up as separate pieces of music is that it connects with the heart and the soul of a church musician somewhere. And that church musician says, I want to sing this, I'm going to bring it to my choir director, or choir director picks it, or a pastor picks it, and that then the power of the gospel story that is expressed in this music reaches both the singers and the people in the congregational pews. One of the great joys of having this music be used through the years so far has been the experiences of the people in the congregation. Music doesn't reach a person physically. I mean, I guess it does through the sound waves and everything, but it's not a physical touch. And yet it can move people emotionally in a way that nothing else can. And that's one of the beauties of each of these pieces of music. They each have their own character, they have their own musical colors, but at the bottom of or at the essence of all of this music is the power of Christ's ministry and love, the grace connection that's for you, for me, and for all. And there is no question that we've literally seen people in the congregation move to tears or filled with joy as we celebrate both Christ's death and Christ's resurrection. So my hope is wherever this music goes, it's touching people's hearts. when I started Church Jazz, I wasn't starting a group. I wasn't starting something called Church Jazz. I was inspired by the power of the Psalms. There is such imagery, there is such beauty. These are eternal in their value and their impact. And I thought at the time that there wasn't a lot of jazz back in 1982 that was being done in the church, at least in mainstream Lutheranism where I was worshiping. And I thought, my goodness, there's such power and beauty here. And what I do is I play the saxophone. So I said, let's see what would happen if we combined the colors of jazz and the improvisation, the power, the emotional power of improvisation to connect and to reflect back to the congregation, Christ's love, the passion of Christ, the mystery of Christ, all of those things. So that's what I hope people experience when they sing part of the Jazz Passion. And I think it's just another color in the musical rainbow, not better or worse than Bach, but different and at the right time, powerful. If a person's interested in obtaining a copy of any of these 12 songs, go to ChurchJazz.com. That has the resources, or if a person is interested in obtaining any of the 12 pieces of music that we've talked about today for the parts of the Jazz Passion, go to ChurchJazz.com, and that has information about how to obtain the music. We're very excited about this music being available in 12 separate pieces. This is a fabulous way for church choir directors and pastors to expand the repertoire of what their choir is doing. And some of the pieces will be very easily singable. Some of them are a little more challenging. But that's the joy of having this available in 12 separate chapters, so to speak. You can pick whatever works for your choir. And I know that some of these pieces have already been done as separate pieces in congregations where some of our musicians are active. And some of them wrote themselves. They just sing easily and they're not a challenge at all. Others of them are definitely something that you just don't sight read. But that's the joy of music. Different levels of complexity, different styles of music within each of these 12 works. Back in 2017, the composers, Bobby Schiff, Bobby Lewis, and myself, and David Abrahamson, who wrote the libretto, decided to get together in a studio and talk about the creative process for the Jazz Passion. That was a fun experience because we set up in a location that had a piano, so Bobby Schiff could give some illustrations of some of the things he was talking about. Bobby Lewis brought his flugelhorn so he could play one of the great melodies of the piece from It's Over. And it was really marvelous to have the four friends sitting together and reminiscing and also exploring some of the motivations and ideas and concepts of the Jazz Passion.